The Asteromorphs, first introduced in C.M. Kosemen's 2006 book All Tomorrows, are a race of hyper-advanced godlike beings. They first began life, like all of the post-human species, as star people, created by Earth and Mars scientists following their devastating interplanetary war somewhere around the 31st century. After colonizing and populating much of the Milky Way galaxy, the star people came into contact with the insane alien race known as the Q, who traveled the cosmos and genetically modified all life forms they came across in some bizarre religious mission. While many star people did succumb to the Q invasion, meeting with a terrible fate, a small number managed to evade them and find refuge. They piled into generation ships, old forms of technology used in the first failed attempts at colonization, and frantically headed out into the void of space. These generation ships had been the cause of much disaster in the past, as life on board was a bleak and unpleasant existence, causing many past communities to lapse into anarchy. But escaping the Q was a matter of life and, if they were lucky, death. They had no choice at this point but to endure a difficult and miserable existence on the generation ships, for the alternative was much worse. After traveling through the void for some time, the escapee star people began to find and confiscate entire asteroid fields. Living permanently on generation ships wasn't an option, and so they began using their advanced technologies to hollow out asteroids, in which they would make their new homes. These now hollow asteroids were made into titanic spaceships, and they were filled up with precious artificially created oxygen and water to support life. There was, however, no gravity, which would become the main factor in these star people's unique path of evolution over the next several million years. Inside their moon-sized havens with no gravity and now safe from the invading Q, these interstellar exiles began to slowly adapt and change through a combination of evolution and genetic engineering. There was no gravity to hold them down, as it were, and so their bones over time began to lengthen and become thinner, more spindly, and the weightlessness of their new existence meant that they developed a new way of propelling themselves from one point to another. They expelled jets of air from their anuses. Whether this was a product of evolution or genetic engineering is unknown. While these developments to their physical forms may seem incredible, they had still only really begun their journey. By this point, the star people had evolved to become the spacers, who had now diverged considerably from their terrestrial ancestors. It was now impossible for them to live anywhere with gravity, and this would cause an immense disconnect from their cousins on other worlds, as we'll see later on. After many more millions of years, the many hollowed-out asteroid ship space arcs had been joined and interlocked to create an enormous new world populated by beings who had by now mastered the void of space. These were the Asteromorphs. Free from the confines of gravity, their fingers could grow extremely long and versatile, each becoming a fully independent limb, and their brains could grow to incredible sizes, as weight was no longer a problem when they spent their entire lives floating in zero gravity. They also still retained their jet-like anuses that had become their primary mode of propulsion. The Asteromorphs were arguably the most intelligent beings to have ever existed in the galaxy, and would go through their daily lives thinking in concepts inconceivable to even the brightest minds of the 21st century. The Asteromorphs, despite their mind-blowing level of advancement, still retained some traits of their ancient human ancestors, still possessing the desire to expand their empire and spread their society as far and wide as they could. To do this, they built huge globular sub-arcs, which they used to go forth and find new territories to colonize. They did not, however, have any interest in colonizing planets. Terrestrial planets were no longer conducive to their lifestyle, as they required zero-gravity environments in which to live and thrive. It would seem that the Asteromorphs would either make these gigantic globular sub-arcs their homes, which they would spread across the galaxy, or that they would find new asteroid fields in which they would, like the star people before them, hollow out the asteroids and transform them into space arcs. The Asteromorphs made their homes in the heavens above the planets, not on the planets themselves. They had no real interest in the comings and goings of the inhabitants on these planets either, who were also descended from the Q-created abominations. Evolutionarily, the Asteromorphs had left all others in the dust. They would watch the other future humans curiously, from a distance, but they wouldn't get involved in their affairs. Sitting above the clouds, watching the terrestrial lifeforms go about their business without intervention and possessing technological advances of an unimaginable scale meant that the Asteromorphs had truly emerged as gods. They remained this way for countless millions of years, virtually unparalleled in their corporeal existence by any other species, apart from one, the Gravital, machines, former ruin haunters who had changed themselves from organic to mechanic after the expansion of their sun made life too uncomfortable. They were also a highly advanced race with an empire that stretched across an untold number of worlds. The two empires had, throughout countless ages, kept a close eye on each other, each believing that their counterpart was waiting for an opportunity to strike. They both knew that a war would be equally catastrophic for both empires, and this knowledge kept everyone at bay for a very long time. However, due to inner conflict within the Machine Empire, a scapegoat was needed to unite the machines and, more importantly, distract its citizens from the problems within their own society. Those in charge of the Machine Empire, in an act of complete lunacy, chose the Asteromorph Empire to be that scapegoat. They spent a staggering 50 million years at war with one another, with countless casualties being suffered on both sides. In the end, however, the Asteromorphs, who had changed and evolved even more since the early days of the war, were triumphant. After this war was finally over, the Asteromorphs had planned to destroy every last machine, only to realize that they were too useful as tools to be completely gotten rid of. They decided instead to modify them so that they would never again become a threat to organic life, changing their programming to dull their imaginations, and then integrated them into the new United Galaxies Empire. The Asteromorphs were now vastly different in appearance. They still retained their long spindly digits derived from the fingers of their ancient ancestors, which had now formed a series of legs and sails to help with gliding through zero gravity. But now their enormous, bulging brains had spread outwards from the sides of their heads, resembling wings. It was at this point that the Asteromorphs finally began to engage with the other organics of the galaxy, their distant cousins, the subjects, who had been kept as pets by members of the Machine Empire. The subjects were rescued and their genetics were used to populate entire planets. By this point, the Asteromorphs had decided that they wanted to be actual gods ruling over lower lifeforms, as they then created from themselves a new form of Asteromorph known as the Terrestrials, who had been heavily modified physically for life on the planets they ruled. Their brains were shrunken down and their limbs were changed into spidery legs for walking. They acted as gods on the worlds of the organics that they watched over, governing them and taking care of them in all ways to help them on their course. This didn't always work out, however, and many times the subjects on these planets rebelled against the Terrestrials, refusing to heed them. This was always punished with extinction, at which point the Terrestrials would create new life from the subject's DNA and try again. These Terrestrials sometimes became corrupt, and rather than helping these new human societies on their way to advancement, they would simply play God and create religions around themselves, forcing the subjects to worship them. As counterproductive as this may seem, however, it seemed to be the most effective method of instilling calm in the subjects and creating peaceful societies. The Asteromorphs also, after many more millions of years, re-encountered the nefarious Q and defeated them. While it is probable that the Asteromorphs then spent several more millions of years nurturing their organic creations and guiding them to become Type 2 and then Type 3 civilizations, the ultimate fate of the Asteromorphs, as stated by the book's alien author a billion years after the events, is not known. Thank you for watching my video. If you enjoyed it, please remember to hit the like button and subscribe to be notified of future uploads. This has been Beware the Q, and I'll see you next time.